Welcome to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises. I'm here today with Sigve Tonstad. You may remember him because he was one of the founding members of our panel here on GPS back in the beginning, the very first few programs. And then, unfortunately, he needed to move back to Norway and was not available from that time on. However, we have the opportunity of having him with us today for a special program of GPS. Just the two of us, a very special, talking about the book that we love, the book of Revelation. And Sigve, what do you do in Norway anyway?
Well, I work as a doctor 2 days a week now. Since January of last year, I have only worked 2 days a week in the hospital. Someone has generously given me a writing grant through Loma University. You have also been part of making that possible. So most of my time I spend writing, and in some ways then as a distant employee and a member of the faculty of Loma University. But I have practiced medicine ever since I finished medical school or finished my residency, so to varying degrees. So now the medical part of my life is a little less than it used to be, but I haven't stopped doing medicine completely.
Mm-hmm. So my title is Professor of New Testament Interpretation, and Sigve's title is Research Professor of New Testament Interpretation, I believe. So that is very, very exciting, and we're glad that you could stay connected to Loma Linda, even though geographically you're not with us as often as we would like. But because you're with us now, we have the chance to go ahead with this program. And I have a very exciting announcement, and that is a new book has come out. And that book is Revelation. And it's in the Paideia commentary series on the New Testament. And this is a series put out by Baker Bookhouse, which is one of the most important publishers when it comes to New Testament in general. And these Paideia commentaries are very popular and have a wide circulation. And I'm just curious, Sigve, how did you get such an assignment? You know, I envy that just a little bit, to be able to speak to the wider scholarly world as a Seventh-day Adventist. That is a unique privilege and not something that our predecessors 2-3 generations back ever thought would happen.
Yeah, I'll try to make it brief, but I was pastoring in Norway. I was working as a doctor, and having always had an interest in biblical studies. And then something came up on how to understand the faith language in Paul. So at that point, I decided it was made possible for me to go to Duke University and study with Richard Hayes, among others. And then from there, in the year 2001, I went to the University of St. Andrews to do a PhD in New Testament with a plan that I would write my dissertation on Revelation, and that I would specifically focus on a verse that is quite familiar to Seventh-day Adventists, Revelation 14:12. Those who keep the commandments of God and have something related to Jesus that has faith in it, and we might come back to that specific interpretation. And I pursued a cosmic conflict reading of Revelation more than what is common in the academy. And when I had finished, at the beginning, my supervisors, Bruce Longenecker and Richard Borkham, were probably somewhat skeptical of my sort of, going cosmic. But when I finished, my supervisor said that he would never read Revelation the same way again. Mm-hmm. And then he moved to Baylor University. And Baylor University, some of the faculty members there are the editors of the Paideia series. And Bruce Longenecker has told me, and I don't think he will mind that I say this, that he wanted it to be part of his professional legacy to have a commentary out there written by Sigve Tonstad. And when I completed it, we had, this wasn't so easy, and I had to do a lot of editing before my manuscript was accepted. But when it was, we had it all down, he said that now I can die in peace, because we had kind of completed what, I think he quite sincerely thought that a cosmic conflict understanding of the or take on the storyline in Revelation is legitimate and is under-projected in existing commentaries or existing approaches to this book. So that was, of course, very unexpected for me. But I'm very happy that it came out this way. Very happy.
Well, Seventh-day Adventists, I think, have always felt that they have a mission to the world. But sometimes that mission to the world is for select groups. And sometimes the more wealthy, for example, perhaps some of the non-Christian religions, perhaps the scholars of the world have not been impacted. And so to see you engaging in this way and even convincing people that this type of approach, this cosmic conflict approach, is valuable for the study of the New Testament, I think that's dramatic, and it's very exciting for me.
Yeah, I have to say, so yes, I obviously have some baggage with me from my own background, and I have always felt that the theme of cosmic conflict is under-projected in biblical scholarship. But I have not written a denominational, I have not felt obligated in my work with the text to say, no, I need to make sure that I say this so that my denomination will agree with me. I have done as honestly and seriously as I can, felt I am obligated to this text, to its message, without, and if there is an apologetic element to it, then the apologetics will always need to be that the only good exegesis, the only good apologetics is good exegesis. You cannot sort of say, well, I'm going to use this for some denominational purpose, and that would not have been acceptable to me, and it would not have been acceptable to the publishers.
Well, as a fellow Seventh-day Adventist and one who has done evangelism for many years of my life, I think one of the things we have always sought to tell the world is, look, your number one loyalty is not to an institution. Your number one loyalty is not to a human group of people that is seeking to honor God wholeheartedly, but your number one responsibility is to God, and the window to God is through the Scriptures. So being faithful to the Bible is the number one task of the Seventh-day Adventist mission. And so I'm very excited that you have worked so hard at this. And
if there is in my work something that looks like a corrective to what my church has taught, well, let's try it out and see.
Well, let's do that. Let's find out. Exactly. That's why we're here today. So, first of all, I thought it might be interesting to read from the book jacket, because on the book jacket is a name, Richard B. Hayes. Now, that may not mean a lot to many of you, but to those of us who study New Testament, Richard Hayes is one of the preeminent names of our era. Whenever he gives a paper on Paul or on the Gospels, for example, always the room is full, because everybody wants to hear what he has to say. But not only that, there's a sense that he actually lives what he's saying. It's almost like going to a preaching service to hear him. So He's someone I know very well and highly respect. He's been to Loma Linda and was deeply appreciated by the docs here for his approach to Paul in particular. And let me share with you what he says, and maybe this will need a little translation along the way. It says, Tonstad's remarkable commentary offers a comprehensive reading of Revelation that is both literarily sensitive and theologically incisive. Put it another way, it's beautifully written and gets deep into the details. With careful attention to the text's engagement with Israel's scriptures, in other words, how the book of Revelation relates to what Christians sometimes call the Old Testament. Attention to the text's engagement with Israel's scriptures, Tonstad interprets Revelation as a Christologically centered disclosure of the astonishing, counterintuitive triumph of God's love over the cosmic power of evil. Put that another way, Tonstad's commentary is a Christ-centered interpretation of how Jesus triumphs over Satan and over evil at the end. This deeply intelligent commentary, how I wish people would say that about my work. I love this.
They do say that about your work.
Behind my back? Well, that's good to know.
Well, I said it up front now.
Yes, but I love this. I mean, coming from Richard Hayes, it's kind of like, wow. This deeply intelligent commentary challenges historicist readings of the book as a simple document of political resistance to the Roman Empire. And what Hayes means by historicist is that many commentators see Revelation as a reaction against the Roman Empire, even though in the seven churches, which are the plain language part of the book, there's no reference to the Roman Empire. But that's a popular view, and Sigve stands up against that view, as most Seventh-day Adventist scholars have, for, I think, good textual reasons. At the same time, it grapples thoughtfully with pervasive misreadings of Revelation, both in the Christian theological tradition and in Western literary culture more broadly, as a fountainhead of resentment and violence. In other words, a lot of people, particularly secular, sometimes atheistic, will look at Revelation and say, this is just full of violence. This is disgusting. How can you honor a book like that? And in fact, in the early church, there were a few people who were reluctant to even let it into the canon. But what you have done, I think, and what Hayes is talking about here, is to show that God is not the active agent in the violence of Revelation. We'll get into that in a moment, but let me finish this first. All who read this commentary will be forced to reconsider what they think they know about the apocalypse. Let anyone who has an ear listen. Fantastic endorsement of this commentary, and I encourage you to have a look at it at your next opportunity. So, Sigve, what about this business of divine agency? When you pick up the book of Revelation, you read it. I mean, it says, there's a trumpet blown in heaven, and here things happen on the earth, and there's a book opened up in heaven, and here things happen on the earth. It looks like God is actively engaged in some things that seem pretty violent. How do you work your way through what a surface reading might suggest?
Well, that is one of the most important decisions you make on interpretation. So you look at the seals, at least from the second seal onward. There is war, there is famine, there is death. You look at the trumpets, the bad things, one bad thing after another. You look at the bowls, it's getting worse. It's similar to the trumpets, it's just getting worse. And the question is, who is doing it? And in my understanding and in my as careful explanation as I can do, I say this is demonic activity. And what is God doing? He is exposing it. God exposes the activity of the other side. Yes, he blows the trumpet, but not so as to have God as the acting subject, that God is not the one who executes here. He is the one who reveals it. And interpreters of Revelation, I would say 90%, 95%, have all assigned these calamities to God. Very few think that there could be some other explanation. Now, even if you say, as I do, that God is permitting it, that is, that is a problem too. That is something one needs to think about. But here, in my understanding, God is exposing its revelation as expose of the activity of the other side. And we, as readers, we have often been guilty of sending the bill for the calamities in the world to the wrong address. And we have been guilty of that as readers of Revelation too, because we have said, as many say, this is a horribly violent book, and God is doing all these things, and who wants to have anything to do with such a God? The psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung says that you should not, that the writer of Revelation is a very unbalanced person. He needs to, see a psychiatrist. And others too have indicted the book as a kind of, one person says that the book of Revelation is the Judas of the New Testament, and the other books in the New Testament, we have a Jesus that we can relate to. But not in this book. But if we say that Jesus in Revelation is a revealer, and that you have an expose of demonic activity, and Jesus did indeed come to the world to expose and defeat the demonic, then we have a coherent interpretation. We are not playing games with the text, and we do not have divine agency. We have demonic agency.
Well, I can honestly say, my son is constantly reporting back to me from all the atheists in his internet circles. He's part of these internet chat groups and stuff, and every so often I hear him pounding the wall and stuff. He's so frustrated with the kind of things they say about the Bible and about God and so forth. So it's evident that a lot of people, even Christian ministers, will read the book of Revelation and see retribution as a major, major thing. It'd probably be helpful to our audience. Could we go to maybe one text that you could work through for us?
Let's try.
Yeah? Okay.
Don't make it too hard.
Well, I think your favorite is the Fifth Trumpet, isn't it? To illustrate this?
It's a good place. I don't mind the Fifth Trumpet.
All right. So how would you, in the Fifth Trumpet, you have a trumpet sounds, and a star falls, and the pit of the abyss opens up, and all kinds of stuff is going on. So how would you go about showing somebody that text is talking about Satan rather than God's active judgments, let's say? Yeah.
So the expert in our faith community on the trumpets is Jon Paulien. So it's you who have done, much of the groundwork, and you have also been one of the major change agents in how to read Revelation with respect to how Revelation uses the Old Testament. So let's. So one of the issues here is then an issue of method to let the Old Testament speak. Is there anything sort of Old Testament background here? And it's very easy to see that the Fifth Trumpet echoes Isaiah 14, 12 to 20. All the steps, battle, someone falling to the earth, opening the abyss, all those steps are there. So you have an Old Testament background text that already has a cosmic conflict thing. You already have a agency in the Old Testament text. And then what happens then when the star falls, opens the abyss, the hellhole, and smoke comes out, it darkens the world, the smoke crystallizes into locusts. The locusts metamorphose into scorpions. The scorpions metamorphose into horses. The horses is, very elaborate, but they have a head in the head, where the head should be, and they have a head at the tail end too. And it even has a mouth. And the mouth is the instrument that causes harm in the world. This is a phenomenon that speaks. It's the language of this phenomenon. So here, people have had the temptation and fallen for the temptation to say, well, which event in history is prefigured here? Is it this event, and Uriah Smith, he would say, this is Islam, this is in his time, and he thought this, he allotted a big piece of history to Islam, and it kind of ends there. The Fifth Trumpet, Sixth Trumpet is all Islam. And newer interpreters have taken it beyond that and taken it into something, European intellectual history. So what do I want to do with it? I want to say John is describing a demonic phenomenon. He is using overwrought language, hyperbole, excessive language, describing a beast that does not exist in nature. Why not just say, he is saying that there is a demonic force at work in the world, and leave it at that, and not diminish the force of the symbols by trying to distill it into specific historical events. If we go by, the latest I have heard on trying to make it into something in history, we miss the entire 20th century. There is no Holocaust, there is no Hiroshima, there is no environmental devastation, at least not much. If you leave it where I want to leave it, all the things that happen in history will be adequately taken care of, will be adequately represented by the horror, the sort of overwrought horror that you have there. It's a demonic activity, and you can ascribe it to the activity of the other side. Jesus calls Satan a liar in John 8:44, and he says he's a murderer from the beginning, and he's a destroyer. And so it's quite easy, actually, to say that we must make the demonic side, we must make Satan the acting subject, the agent in these calamities. The big question is, why haven't we done that already? And I'm saying now is the time to do it.
Because maybe we've been distracted by other possibilities that haven't been quite as powerful as we had hoped.
And other possibilities and other priorities,
Yeah.
So,
well, let me offer a couple observations. You mentioned Isaiah 14. I think a text that is even more closely connected to the Fifth Trumpet is Joel chapter 2, where you see this locust plague, etc.
Yeah.
But interpreters of Joel tend to see that as metaphorical for the Babylonian invasion. So the judgment of God is not exercised in God spanking Israel, but it's exercised in Israel abandoning God and God allowing calamities to come that he had been preventing before. And so that whole idea that this is not divine agency, I think is supported there. And that combines with a number of what people call divine passives in the Fifth Trumpet itself. It says repeatedly, it was given for this to happen, and it was given, and they were told. So I think that would be in support of your...
So we had a book event here on last weekend at Loma University, and we had two visitors. We had my own mentor from St. Andrews, Bruce Longenecker, was here, and a fellow student from St. Andrews was here too, who's now teaching at Biola University. And he pointed out that I say of that expression that you just used, that I talk about divine permission and demonic commission. That God permits something, but the devil commissions it and makes it happen. And in the Fifth Trumpet, to stay with that, at the end in verse 11, it says that they have they have the angel of the abyss over them, and his name is in Hebrew Abaddon and in Greek Apollyon. The focus is on the agent, and the name of the agent in English is the destroyer.
Yeah.
So it is in some ways handed to us in quite accessible pedagogy.
Quite plain. Another one is the most prominent New Testament parallel to the fifth trumpet is Luke 10. And in Luke 10 you have the scorpions, etc., but that's all demonic activity that is battling with Jesus and his disciples in Luke. And Revelation would show it more of an ongoing kind of thing.
Yeah, and it is important to clarify who is doing what, because at the beginning of the cosmic conflict, Lucifer proposes to improve the divine government. He proposes to say, we can do this better. This is not good enough. It's not, a good economy. And then, so let him show us what his improvement is. So to read Revelation here as an expose, to get to know the truth, not only of the divine government, but of the other person's alternative, seems to me to show that the devil is defeated by the deeds he has perpetrated on earth.
I think you've kind of answered a question that was in my mind, and the question would be, why does God permit? See, because we have this language of permission there. Why does God permit when it causes so much suffering?
Well, there is a truth element there, this is quite an imperfect analogy, but guilt must be proven. That you cannot in a society of law arrest someone for things they have not yet done. So there is that sort of evidentiary burden is a risk of any sort of permissive system. So that is some, can God sustain that? And of course, so I say, yes, God does permit it, and God makes it up to the victim. That is an important part of it. Divine permission is not divine indifference. It's not just sort of let it all hang out there. Let us. Yeah. So God has not disengaged. He does make it up to the victim.
So you're taking very seriously the title of the book, which is Revelation. And in a sense, the dimension you're adding here, it's not only a revelation of Jesus Christ, but it's also a revelation of this alternative form of government that needs to be exposed, that needs to be totaled up so that it can be dealt with in the end. So anyway, well, it's good to have you with us again for this special edition of GPS. I'm Jon Paulien, and this has been Sigve Tonstad, and we've been exploring deeply into the book of Revelation again. And we look forward to another session soon. See you then.